We are thrilled that you're with us on this beautiful spring day. We're on the last day of Lent here, Lent Sunday, the final day, Palm Sunday it is, and we're headed towards next week, Resurrection Sunday, which, yeah, it's a good thing. The promise, the rock underneath the sorrow we feel. 5 weeks ago, we walked with Jesus, into the wilderness. That's been the series itself, Learning the Wilderness Way. The wilderness has something to teach us, not just the wilderness that Jesus walks into, but what that implies for every wilderness that we will walk into, whether we want to or not. So we're not rushing past it. We're not treating it like a detour, but paying attention to what happens there in the wilderness as Jesus walks. We've watched the wilderness form trust as part of its intent. Reveal what we rely on. Free us from the need to perform. Confront our relationship with power. Teach us to wait for provision that comes on God's timeline and not ours. And through it all, one question has been pressing just below the surface, and I would say it's this one. What is the wilderness actually preparing us for? Because the wilderness is never just about the wilderness. It's always preparation for something. Jesus didn't spend 40 days in the desert so that he could become more centered, spiritually grounded kind of person who handled stress well. The wilderness was forming for him something specific. And today, Palm Sunday, we find out what that is. Matthew tells us a very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road while others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and those that followed shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest heaven." The whole city is stirred at this moment. The crowd is electric, a moment they've been waiting for, longing for, has arrived. And here's what we need to understand about this moment to feel the weight of what's happening. This is exactly, going back into our series, into the story, what the tempter offered Jesus on the pinnacle of the temple. The crowd, the recognition, the instant platform. As he says to him, "Throw yourself down and the angels will catch you. The people will see. They will follow. Everything you came to do will begin right now." But as we know, as we heard, as we saw, Jesus refuses. And now, on the other side of 3 years of ministry, 3 years of teaching and healing and loving people, people that the empire didn't think were worth loving, the crowd has shown up anyway. Without the spectacle, without the shortcut, without the compromise, the people are lining the road, waving branches, shouting his name. And everything the tempter promised on that mountaintop has arrived on the Father's timeline, through the Father's way, at the Father's appointed moment. Not because Jesus forced it, but because he trusted it. Try to imagine, if you can, that scene. People begin to gather, as Matthew says, cloaks laid on the road, branches in their hands. The crowd shouting, as Matthew says, as we read, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest." And everything in the cultural imagination of first century Jerusalem is saying, this is the moment. This is when the Messiah takes the throne. This is when Rome falls. This is when Israel is restored. That's the story they're longing for. The crowd is ready for a king. It feels like hope. It feels like something is about to happen, like everything might finally change. But if we step back, if we widen the lens just a little, we realize this is not just a moment of celebration. This is a moment of revelation. Because there isn't one, actually, there are two processions entering the city that day. Two entrances, two kingdoms, two completely different visions of how the world works. One side of the city from the west, another procession is already unfolding as Pontius Pilate enters Jerusalem. Because you see, he's coming. It's the Passover feast. There are, historians say, potentially 250,000 people that have gathered in the city. All of the Jews in the area come in for the 7-day celebration. And so there's a bit of concern for those guarding the empire. Pilate wants to be there. So he comes in, not quietly, not subtly. He rides in on a war horse. A symbol everyone would recognize, a symbol of power, of strength, of control. Behind him, soldiers, armor, weapons, the sound of metal, the rhythm of boots. A visible reminder that Rome is in charge because it's Passover. And to the Romans, Passover is dangerous. It's the story of liberation, of a people who threw off an empire. And Rome knows that story. So Pilate doesn't just arrive, he stages a display, a warning, a message. Don't try it again. This is what power looks like. Force, control, dominance. The ability to make things happen. And everyone watching understands that. This is how the world works. Does it feel that way sometimes? But notice how Jesus enters the city. Because here's where Matthew slows down to make sure we don't miss something easy to miss. Jesus doesn't arrive on a war horse. He arrives on what? A donkey. And in the first century, this is not a small detail. This is a declaration. A conquering king, as Pilate did, would enter the city on a horse, a war horse, because that represents power and domination. A king who came in peace, who came not to conquer, not to force, but to serve, rode a donkey. And everybody knew that. And just to make the connection crystal clear, Matthew is quoting Zechariah directly as he writes, "See, your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey." Gentle. It's the same word Jesus used to describe himself when he said, "Come unto me, all ye who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Gentle. Often translated meek, the word is the same. Not weak, not passive, not a pushover. Meek in the Hebrew imagination meant strength that had been formed in trustworthy hands. Power that had learned to serve rather than dominate. And the wilderness is where that kind of meekness gets formed. Jesus rides into Jerusalem as exactly the kind of person the wilderness was instrumental in forming him to be. No need, no interest in performing for the crowd. Not leveraging the moment, not letting the wave of adulation carry him somewhere the Father hadn't led him. And here's what we know that the crowd doesn't. In just 5 days, many of these same voices will be shouting something very different. The adulation will evaporate. The palm branches will be long gone. And as that happens, even some of the disciples will scatter. And here's why. As the shouts of Hosanna ring out from the crowd, lining the streets of the city as Jesus passes by, we often hear it as praise, like celebration, We use that language in worship, and to a degree it is. But it's significant to note that the word originally meant Hosanna means literally, save us now. Save us now. Not someday, not eventually. Now. This isn't just worship. It's an urgent plea. Because the people have been waiting for hundreds of years, waiting for deliverance, waiting for freedom, waiting for God to act. And now Jesus, the one being hailed as the Messiah, the anointed liberator who's been promised, is here. Plus, and as they understand it, he has powers the Caesar can only dream of. So they are convinced this is the moment. This is the king. This is the breakthrough. This is when everything changes. No more what? Waiting. Because waiting has a way of stirring things in us. Questions, doubts. That quiet urgency to want to take control. And if we're honest, as we imagine the scene, we're not that different from the crowd. In a sense, we're in that crowd. That crowd may as well be us. Because all too often, we don't just want God to act, we need Him to act. We expect Him to act. Now. But here is the tension. They're right about who Jesus is, but they're wrong about how the kingdom comes. They expected power, overthrow, control, immediate victory, a king who would take charge, one who would fix everything, restore what was broken quickly. They wanted a kingdom without having to wait. And if we're paying attention to the arc of Jesus' ministry, this is the same temptation Jesus faced in the wilderness. Power without the cross. Provision without trust. A kingdom without surrender. Only now, it's not Satan offering it. It's the crowd expecting it. But as we know, and they will soon discover, Jesus doesn't do what they expect Him to do. He doesn't seize power. He doesn't overthrow Rome. He doesn't fix everything overnight. And slowly the excitement starts to fade. The noise quiets. The crowd begins to thin. And within days, just days, the same voices that shouted, Hosanna, save us now, will raise a new cry. Crucify it. Crucify it. And as the tension builds, Jesus finds himself in the garden, in the dark, alone. Matthew leads us up to this moment as he writes, Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to them, Sit here while I go out there and pray. Go over there and pray. He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him. And he began to be so sorrowful and troubled. And then he said to them, My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. This isn't a performance. This is not Jesus going through the theological motions of what suffering is supposed to look like. This is a human being, fully human in every sense that matters, pressed to the absolute limit of what a person can carry. The wilderness taught Jesus to sit with silence, but this silence is different. This isn't the quiet 40 days of formation. This is the silence of a man who can see what's coming and feels the full weight of it pressing down on his chest. He goes a little further and falls to the ground, the scriptures tell us, and prays the prayer we've all likely considered at some point. We've all heard it. Father, if it's possible, may this cup be taken from me. And here's where we have to pause for a moment. Because this is the moment the entire wilderness experience has been building toward. This moment. Not the miracles, not the teaching, not even the cross itself. This moment. The garden, the darkness, the unanswered prayer. Is it possible? Is there, can there be another way? And that same voice from heaven that not long before had affirmed his belovedness is silent. Howard Thurman, renowned philosopher, minister, educator, civil rights leader, wrote that the spiritual life of Jesus can only be fully understood when we take seriously the fact that he lived as one of the, what he calls, the disinherited. In other words, not living from a position of privilege, not from a place of safety, but as someone for whom the systems of the world offered no protection, no recourse, no way out. Thurman said that what Jesus found, what he always found, wasn't escape, but a presence. A ground of being. A love that circumstances could not reach. But here's what the wilderness adds to that picture. Jesus didn't stumble into that presence in Gethsemane. He had been formed toward it. 40 days of silence, 40 days of hunger, 40 days of learning in his body, in his breathing, in his will, that the Father could be found in exactly the kind of place that offers nothing else to hold on to. The wilderness had been training him for this garden all along. So when he arrives with no leverage, no way out, no disciples awake to sit with him, just the darkness and the Father, he isn't discovering for the first time that the Father is present in the darkness. He already knows it. He knows it in his bones from experience. From 40 days of it settling into his soul before he needed it to be. And the question that has been pressing beneath every moment of the wilderness from the very beginning, not a theological position, but as the most personal, urgent question a human can carry, is this: can the Father be trusted here? Not in the quiet of 40 days. Not in the moment of temptation when the answer came clearly, but here. Here, in this garden, in this darkness, with this cup, where the silence of heaven feels less like formation and more like absence. And yet, the formation holds. Because the wilderness already taught him that the silence of heaven is not the absence of the Father. It never was. And what Jesus does next is the most wilderness-formed moment in the entire gospel. He doesn't run. He doesn't perform. He doesn't call down fire from heaven or for a legion of angels to come to his defense, which he could have. He stays fully present in that moment and utters these words. Not my will, but your will be done. 5 weeks ago, we said that the wilderness teaches trust. Not trust as an idea or even a theological position, but trust as something so deeply formed into the body, into our breathing, into the reflexes, that when the hardest moment comes, it's already there. It's the natural response. It doesn't have to be forced. It can't be manufactured. It's not about white knuckling. It's already settled. Parker Palmer writes about what he calls the tragic gap, the space between the way things are and the way they ought to be. We all have felt that, right? And he says the spiritual task is not to close that gap through willpower or denial, but to learn to stand in it, to be present to the reality of what it is without being destroyed by it, without escaping into false hope, without collapsing into despair. Simply, not my will be done, but yours. That is a person standing in the tragic gap, fully present to the horror that is coming, the horror of what is coming or already is, fully trusting the Father who has led them there. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because the wilderness formed in them something that pain alone cannot undo. Matthew tells us that Jesus prays the same prayer 3 times. 3 times. Which I think may be his way of helping us recognize that this isn't an issue resolved quickly. It's not Jesus saying, okay, I know I'm supposed to pray this prayer and everything's going to be all right. This is not a moment, a triumphant moment of instant surrender. He goes back. He prays again. He returns to his disciples, still asleep. He goes back again. 3 times. The wilderness, it turns out, doesn't make hard things easy. It makes us capable of staying present to them. And Jesus stays. He doesn't leave the garden. He doesn't numb the anguish. He doesn't try to manufacture a feeling of peace he doesn't have. He prays honestly, vulnerably, and stays present. And he trusts. Not my will be done, but yours. It's not likely that any of us will ever face what Jesus faced in that garden, but most of us know something about the experience of it. The moment when what you prayed for doesn't come, when the cup doesn't pass, when the silence of heaven feels less like peace and more like absence. And everything in you wants to run or numb or find any road that leads away from this. And the wilderness, the one Jesus walked and the ones that we find ourselves in, is forming us exactly for those moments. Not to make them painless, to make us capable of being able to stay. Thurman held the conviction that the religion of Jesus was not a way of escaping the hard realities of life, but a resource for living within them without being destroyed. a presence that suffering cannot reach, a ground that circumstance cannot shake. And the invitation of Gethsemane, the invitation of the whole series that we've been through, is simply this: let the wilderness do its work. Not because hard things are good, but because the one who leads us into them wants to form something in us that we cannot manufacture for ourselves. The wilderness always has a destination. Trust that has moved from idea to instinctive response. Peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. A will that has learned to say, even here, even now, even in this, not my will, but yours be done. Jesus came into Jerusalem on a donkey, humble, unhurried, exactly what the wilderness formed in him. He went into the garden alone, sorrowful, pressed to the limit, present, fully present to what was coming. The formation in the wilderness held. Not because it made him immune to suffering, but because it had formed in him something deeper than suffering could reach and overcome. A trust so settled he could pray honestly. A surrender so real it would stay present. A love so rooted it would walk willingly toward the very thing every human instinct screams to avoid. The formation in the wilderness held. Next week, on the other side of the cross, on the other side of the silence, on the other side of the tomb, we'll discover that everything the wilderness promised was true. That the Father who led Jesus into the desert and into the garden, into the darkness, did not abandon him there. The provision came, not in the way anyone expected, but it came. And it will come for us too. So practices to consider, as we've done each and every week, the means by which we learn to understand how to take into our body these things that Jesus is showing us and living before us, that it might not just be the thing that we agree with and believe can happen, assuming that somehow that trust comes because we believe the right things or because we do certain things that good people or religious people or Christians are supposed to do, but because we understand the power of formation, the way it works. Jesus' great desire for us is that we would be formed into his image. That we, in our wilderness experiences, would understand, what's the thing that I do? If this is where I am, how do I get to the place where I can say with honesty, vulnerability, and stand firm, not your will be done. Not my will be done, but yours, here, now, even in this. And so practices to consider. Practice number 1. This week, pay attention. Consider the donkey. Some of us are thinking of Shrek. This week, pay attention to the moments when you're tempted to arrive differently than you actually are. To perform for the crowd, to manage how you're perceived. So subtle and yet so destructive. To leverage the moment for your own recognition. And instead ask, what would it look like to show up simply as who I am without the war horse? To be present, humble, unhurried. Exactly who the wilderness has been forming you to be, if you'll allow it. Another practice to consider. And these aren't, do all three of these. These are just simple ideas of simple ways, and that's what a practice does. It teaches me a routine, a new way of moving and being in the world that eventually settles into, this is just what I do, and it changes me from the inside. Practice number 2, stay in the garden. Identify one situation in your life right now where everything in you wants to run, numb, or escape. And for so many in the room and around the world, that's not a hard thing to imagine. Identify that situation, and this week practice staying, not trying to fix it or resolve it, just staying present to it. Bring it honestly to God, the way Jesus did. Without performance, without pretending it doesn't hurt. I grew up in a faith that in so many ways, the expectation was that if you're really a Christian and have faith, when the wilderness comes, when the worst you can imagine happens, you're somehow supposed to put on a smile and say, it's okay. But it's not. Death, sin, disease was never supposed to be part of the plan. And we can't pretend that just a smile or believing certain things is going to carry us through the wilderness or give us what we need to stay present in it with the expectation, even when it doesn't feel like it. As we sang today, God with us, He's still good. Nothing in this feels good, but somewhere my body can learn that I can trust that, even when my mind isn't sure. Simply, if it's possible, let this cup pass. The honesty of Jesus, I'd rather not be here. If there's a plan B, now would be a good time. But not my will, but yours be done. And then in the staying, practice that prayer, not my will, but yours. Not as resignation, not as, okay, I give up. Do your worst. As a desire to learn, to experience, to take into your bones, trust. A third practice, notice what the wilderness has formed. As we near the end of the series, take some time this week to reflect on that whole journey. Ask yourself honestly, what has this season formed in me that wasn't there or wasn't settled just 6 weeks ago? Maybe it's a quieter trust or the willingness to want to step into trust. Maybe it's a loosened grip on something that's been easier or you've been controlling. Maybe it's a deeper honesty about what you've been waiting for. Write it down, name it. Recognize that this is the moment, this is the thing. It's not surprising God. We have to see it for what it is and admit that and shake our fist if we have to. God can handle it. Write it down, name it. Receive it as the gift of the wilderness. The gift the wilderness always intended to give. And that's hard to do. For Jesus to see that moment as a gift, humanly, it's virtually impossible unless you've been formed in such a way that you know, even here, I am loved. Even here, there is hope. Even here, the Father can be trusted. And I may not see or feel that now, but what I know to be true, I want to stay grounded in. How many times or people do you know who have been through the experience that the world, whatever it was, pulled the rug out from under them, and all they're left with is the hope that somehow this would go away, and yet in the pursuit of a God who loves them, a God who can be trusted, even with shaking fists and angry words, at some point come to say, it's the worst thing I've ever been through, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But I'll tell you this, I wouldn't trade it for the world. Write it down, name it, receive it as the gift the wilderness always intended to give. Because the wilderness doesn't just take things from us. It forms things in us, if we'll let it. And what it forms is exactly what we'll need for what comes next. So may you go into this week as one choosing to ride on the back of a donkey, humble, unhurried, exactly as you are. May you find the courage to stay in the gardens of your life without running, numbing, or pretending. May you pray honestly, if it's possible, let this cup pass. And discover in the staying that the Father who led you there has not left you alone in it. And may the trust the wilderness has been forming in you hold the way it held Jesus when the hardest moment comes. Because it will hold. Because it will hold. And on the other side of it, the provision that was always coming will finally arrive. Would you pray with me? Father, as you well know, in our humanity, this is something difficult to grasp. It's hard to believe that ultimately in these moments when we're in the midst of sorrow, loss, pain, the wilderness, that anything good can be in it, let alone come from it. So for all of us, Father, standing in these moments in our own garden of darkness, give us a sense of your presence. Help us discover that you are there. Help us be willing to want to find you and put our hope and trust in you. Give us the will and then the capacity, the simple steps to move in that direction, knowing that you'll meet us there and give us what we need, the daily bread that will meet the hunger, the need we have to keep moving forward into what you have for us. Thank you that that moment has an end. There's a day we exit from the wilderness to find that you've been good and loving. For however long it lasted and we didn't feel it, that we'll know in our bones, oh yes, I can see it now. We thank you in advance. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
From the dust we came, to the dust we shall return. From the dust we came, to the dust we shall return. God everlasting.